want to make my car faster and I want to add on power. What is the best way to do that? I've heard of turbochargers, I've heard of superchargers, and I've heard of nitrous. That is what we are addressing today.
We do often start with headers and intake and exhaust and camshafts, but when you want more power, typically it'll come up, do I want a supercharger? Do I want a turbocharger? Do I want nitrous? What one has what I need? And oftentimes there's a debate between what one's better. And in reality, in the grand scheme of things, it more comes down to what you use the vehicle for. So here we have a Jackson Racing supercharger. This is on a 4-cylinder, a Honda K20 motor. And the idea of having this, you see it as a belt-driven unit. So superchargers, there's a couple different kinds, but the thing that they all share is that they're typically belt-driven. So they use the engine's power to create the momentum to make boost. They suck air in through here. These are two almost corkscrew-like blades, and those will take air and compress it and force it into the engine. So the nice thing about a supercharger is typically the second you hit your pedal, you begin to build boost. Now on a 4-cylinder application, people have noticed that sometimes it makes more power as it gets higher in the RPM band. On a larger motor, a V8, a V6, you can oftentimes drive a larger size blower because most of those engines have enormous amounts of torque that they can sacrifice to make the bigger power. But in an application like this, something such as road racing, autocross, any of those kind of things, a supercharger will have an incredible advantage because there is no spool time. The moment you hit the pedal, it starts making power right away. They are limited as to how high a boost they can make. So typically, you can spin a supercharger to its efficiency range, be it 10 pounds, 12 pounds, somewhere in that range. Past that, it begins building more heat than it is helping you. And so these impellers, as they spin at higher speeds, build a lot of heat, and that can lead to pre-detonation. And so excellent for good immediate power. They feel very strong. They have an incredible whine that people love the sound of, and very, very great power adder option. Typically will not be the highest horsepower, but more driver enjoyment is what superchargers typically create. They make on larger V8s and V6s, they make incredible torque, that wheel standing torque, the ability to have all the power right away. Now, they do have some limitations in regards to cooling capability. The newer Shelby Mustangs and some of the newer supercharged vehicles, they will build an intercooler in between the blower and the intake manifold as it goes into the engine. And that's to help cool that charge before it goes into the engine. This is one we have sitting around, and just so people have an understanding of what it is, this is a wheel removed from inside of a turbocharger. Oftentimes when you see a turbocharger, you will see both halves. You have the exhaust half and you have the compressor half. The idea is a turbocharger will use your already exiting exhaust, which is already waste. And that waste is funneled into this housing. And that in turn spins this wheel. Now they share a shaft. The opposite side will begin creating suction, which is compressed into boost. So just to get an idea, I have this up here and I was going to show you. You look at this wheel. This is where air would be sucked in, and this is where boost would be created. If we induce, in a sense, exhaust pressure, you notice the wheel spins. So you're using your waste of your engine already as free power, and it begins spinning the turbocharger, which builds boost. So rather than having a belt create your boost, you're using your waste to create boost. Now, oftentimes to gain higher horsepower, you have way more lag. Lag is the time from when you hit the throttle. You're asking for power. It'll begin to build, and depending on the size of the turbo, may take a little while in the RPM bed before power comes on, before it reaches full boost. And so these do have more of a top end power. Turbochargers are primarily put on, I mean, almost every vehicle now, but they have a little delay. And so if you were road racing or autocrossing and you went to hit the throttle to come out of a turn, that delay is something the driver would have to get used to, meaning he may have to hit the throttle before he wants power in order to allow it to build before it comes on. Typically, turbochargers do excellent for straight line racing, top end power, highway roll racing. A lot of factory vehicles will use a smaller turbocharger to try to eliminate some of that lag, and that smaller amount of the smaller turbocharger will create a sooner or a quicker spool up. The downfall is up top at the end of your RPM band. Sometimes they'll fall flat a little bit. And so turbocharger sizing determines power and where that power is going to be and where that torque will be. Superchargers also, depending on size, have a little bit of an effect similar to that, but they are building boosts almost immediately. Nitrous is a very common power adder. It's something that we install in a lot of customer vehicles. It does have potential to be incredibly violent, and so it does need and require a lot of safeguards and a lot of understanding of how the system works. This here is the nitrous fogger. This is the nozzle that we typically will plumb into the intake. This setup happens to be a wet setup. We have the fuel going in and the nitrous going in. They're controlled by, you have 3 solenoids here. This is a purge solenoid. This is the nitrous to allow nitrous coming from the line to go in. And this is fuel connected to your fuel source. Now, when activated, nitrous primarily is 1 part nitrogen, 2 parts oxygen. When it gets into the engine, it releases the 2 oxygen molecules. So in a sense, it doubles oxygen. That oxygen needs fuel to burn, so the fuel that has been added helps you make more power immediately. Now, nitrous is one of those things that does require a lot of tuning, safeguards. It has to be used correctly. It can be very dangerous, and it does require a lot of maintenance. You use it all the time. You're typically only supposed to hold it 10 to 13 seconds at a time, and you do have to allow your motor time to cool in between using it because it creates a lot of heat very rapidly. Also, you typically have to run colder plugs, reduce some ignition timing, and of course run a higher octane fuel. So in a sense, you have to be set up to run it before you run it. Without these in place, it can cause catastrophic damage to the motor. Nitrous is kind of something for the track. It's not recommended for being used on the roads, and it is something we recommend customers use at the track. So there we go, turbochargers, nitrous, and superchargers.
And if you like that video, go ahead and push share and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you next Wednesday.